The distress call first appeared as a tiny flicker on a quiet, deep space listening post far from the busy centers of human activity. The night shift crew had been half awake, drinking warm coffee and watching the stars, expecting nothing more than routine signals from passing ships or stray static drifting from the void. It was supposed to be a calm shift, the kind where nothing unusual ever happened. But the moment the strange signal hit their receivers, the silence of the room broke. At first, no one understood what it was. It didn't match any known pattern. The signal was shaky, cracked, and full of strange echoes. It sounded like a voice trying to speak through a storm. The crew frowned at their screens, adjusting filters, slowing the playback, enhancing the audio, but the more they worked on it, the more uneasy everyone became. The distress call carried a tone that no computer could hide: fear. Real, desperate fear. A young technician leaned closer to her screen, squinting as the coded waves turned into fragments of words. She could hear someone far away shouting instructions, alarms blaring in the background, and a deep booming noise that didn't sound like any natural event. It was the sound of something breaking. Something big. Another crew member raised his head and said in a low voice that this wasn't a normal distress signal. Normally, calls for help followed a strict format with clear coordinates and identification codes. This one was chaotic, like the sender was running while transmitting it. There was no official ID, no name of a ship or colony. Only a trembling, fragmented voice begging anyone who could hear them to respond. The crew transmitted the recording to Earth Command immediately. Even though they weren't sure what they were listening to, something inside them whispered that it wasn't normal. It wasn't a simple accident, or a malfunction, or pirates. It felt older, deeper, like a warning carried by the stars themselves, on the other side of the galaxy. Far beyond human borders, the message had already reached the Zithari Republic, the rightful owners of the colony that had sent the signal. But instead of reacting quickly, their Senate debated endlessly. Some believed it was a trap. Others feared it might drag them into a war. A few argued that the colony was too far and too small to risk a fleet. Days passed. No ship moved, but humans had only been in space for a short time. They still carried the old instinct of helping first and questioning later. Humanity had seen suffering before on Earth, in their history, in their disasters, and something about the raw fear in that message stirred something in them. They couldn't ignore it. The transmission reached Earth Command at dawn. Officers gathered around the holoscreen while the broken message played again. They listened to the strange weapons firing, the cries for help, the heavy thuds of something powerful hitting metal walls. Everyone in the room felt a chill. One of the senior officers crossed his arms and said the signal was too genuine to be a trap. The colony was under attack, and the attackers were using energy waves that didn't match any modern technology known in the galaxy. That alone shook the officers. It meant some group was breaking ancient laws of war. Someone was using weapons banned long before humans even entered space. The officers didn't wait for political permission. They didn't wait for other civilizations to make the first move. They sent an emergency call to the Terran fleet, ordering a rapid response group to prepare for departure. Humanity had never carried much political weight in the galaxy. They were too new, too young, too emotional, as some alien diplomats liked to say. But humans had something the old empires had forgotten: speed. When someone needed help, humanity ran, even if no one else did. In less than 2 hours, emergency ships began powering up engines across the orbital docks. Engineers rushed to secure cargo. Medics stocked supplies. Pilots took their seats, adjusting their headsets, waiting for the green signal. The hangars filled with noise as crews worked with practiced, urgent rhythm. They weren't moving for glory. They weren't moving for strategic advantage. They were moving because somewhere in the darkness, Someone was begging for help. News of the Terran fleet's sudden movement spread quickly. Interstellar communication channels lit up with messages from different species. Some wondered what the humans were doing. Others suspected Earth had received secret information. A few even laughed, calling the Terran response reckless. But beneath the jokes, there was a quiet unease. Humans were heading toward a danger that even older civilizations refused to face. As the ships prepared for warp travel, a soft tension filled the air. Every crew member could feel it. They didn't know what they were flying toward, but they understood the weight of the call. The sound of a distant voice crying through static was still stuck in their minds. Some felt their stomach twist at the memory. Others clenched their fists. Something about the fear in that message made them feel protective. Even though they had never met the colony's people, when the final boarding alarm echoed through the station, the pilots looked forward, their eyes focused. The lead vessel sent out a single transmission to Earth Command, confirming readiness. The engines roared as the ships lifted from the docks, forming tight formation in orbit. The moment they received clearance, they jumped into warp space. Inside the warp corridor, everything outside the windows turned into long streaks of blue and white light. The stars stretched into lines like brushstrokes on a dark canvas. The trip would take hours, maybe less, thanks to the new human-designed engines. Humanity had always moved too fast for its own good, but in moments like this, its speed was their greatest strength. While the fleet raced through the void, the crew used the time to study the signal in detail. Analysts slowed the audio and replayed sections. They detected energy patterns from weapons that didn't belong to any known faction. More frighteningly, the power spikes suggested that those weapons could tear through shields with frightening efficiency. The engineers frowned at the readings. They whispered among themselves, confused, trying to understand how such weapons could exist in the modern age. The galaxy had banned them for a reason, because they destroyed entire settlements with little effort. Some soldiers tightened their straps and checked their equipment again, unable to sit still. Others stared quietly at the walls, thinking about the unknown colony in crisis. It didn't matter that the colony wasn't human. It didn't matter that the people there had never heard a Terran voice before. Right now, they were alive, scared, and waiting for someone to answer. And humanity was already on the way far behind them. Political councils and alien governments watched the Terran fleet move across star maps. Some commented that humans were foolish, too quick to rush into danger. Others felt a strange respect, seeing a species so new to the galactic scene acting with such bold determination. A few leaders wondered what kind of people would fly toward an enemy whose identity was still unknown. The stars, silent as always, witnessed everything without judgment. Back on the Terran ships, the crew prepared for arrival, knowing very well that whatever they found might change everything. The signal that started it all played again one last time in the command rooms. Even though the voice was broken and almost impossible to understand, the emotion behind it was clear. Someone out there had faced something terrible. Someone had sent their final hope into the dark, praying that anyone at all would hear it. Humanity had heard it as the warp engines began to slow and the bright lines of light condensed back into stars. The fleet prepared to drop back into normal space. The moment felt long, stretched by anticipation. No one spoke. Every heartbeat felt louder than the hum of the engines. Whatever waited for them on the other side of that junk, they would face it together. Because when someone is in danger, humanity does not wait. Humanity arrives. When the Terran fleet jumped into the warp tunnel, the rest of the galaxy was still trying to understand why humans were the first to respond. In other star systems, governments were still arguing, sending reports back and forth, waiting for someone else to make a decision. But humans didn't wait. They acted. That alone confused many species, because the galaxy had grown comfortable with slow decisions and long talks. Humanity broke that pattern like a sudden spark in dry wood dot inside the Terran flagship. The atmosphere was tense but steady. The crew members weren't panicked. They were focused. Everyone knew they were heading into something serious, maybe something no one had seen for a long time, but that didn't stop them. Instead, it pushed them to move faster. In one of the briefing rooms, officers gathered around a projection table showing the signal patterns. The sound of the distress call repeated in small loops. Short, broken, painful. The voice in the recording faded in and out, shouting instructions, coughing, begging for help. Even though the words were not fully clear, the feeling behind them struck deep. It was the kind of fear that came only when someone faced something truly overwhelming. The analysts worked on decoding the message. Line by line, pulse by pulse, they studied the noise behind the voice. They found energy bursts unlike any modern weapon signature. Some of the older officers exchanged looks, realizing they had seen these patterns somewhere in ancient archives. In old warnings recorded by species that existed long before humans took their first steps into space. The idea that those old weapons were being used again made everyone uneasy, but humans didn't stop. If anything, the strange unknown danger made them more determined to reach the colony faster. In a quiet corner of the ship, technical crews updated the navigation path. The engines glowed brighter, pushing the fleet to its limits. Humanity had always pushed its machines harder than other species dared. Every jump brought them closer to the edge of what the ships could handle. But that was simply how humans operated. If someone needed help, they were willing to bend steel to make it happen. Across other star systems, communication channels buzzed with questions. Why are the humans going first? What do they know? Are they trying to impress someone? Some species guessed that the humans must have special intel or strategic interest. But most simply didn't understand that humans didn't work like old empires. They didn't wait for perfect information. They didn't wait for approval. They saw danger, and they moved toward it. On the Terran medical ship, the crew prepared supplies. They didn't know what kind of injuries they would face, but they packed for everything: burn wounds, radiation damage, shock trauma, even environmental exposure. Human medics had a reputation across the galaxy for being stubborn. Once they started treating someone, they refused to stop until every last person was safe. That same stubborn spirit filled the hallways now. Some medics practiced quiet breathing exercises. Others checked their tools again and again. A few tried to distract themselves with small talk, but the conversation always drifted back to the distress signal. The sound of the terrified voice stayed in everyone's head. In the fighter bays, pilots sat in their cockpits, running checks on their systems. Some tapped their fingers on the control sticks, their helmets resting beside them. They weren't afraid, but they felt a pull in their chest, the natural human urge to protect. That instinct had shaped humanity's history, and now it shaped their role in the galaxy. None of them said it out loud, but everyone felt the same thing. They were flying to help strangers who might not even know humanity existed. But that didn't matter. Help was help. Lives were lives. Meanwhile, on the Zithari side of space, their leaders watched human ships move on the tracker screens. They saw the Terran fleet pushing beyond the border, closing the distance rapidly. Some Zithari officers felt embarrassed that their own government had hesitated too long. Others felt relieved that someone was going anyone. The colony's last known transmission had been full of panic, and now someone was finally answering. In the Terran command room, the Admiral leaned forward as new data appeared. The long-range scanners had picked up faint heat signatures from the direction of the colony. The readings were strange burn patterns across the land, scattered pockets of shield failures, and what looked like destroyed defensive towers. Whatever had attacked the colony had been powerful and efficient. Some officers felt their hearts sink. But the admiral simply gave the order. Increase speed. The fleet accelerated. Their engines began to tremble at the edges of their limits. Sparks of light streaked across the warp corridor. The ships weren't supposed to travel this fast for long, but no one slowed down. They trusted their engineers, and they trusted their own will. Far away, in quiet space stations and diplomatic centers, many species watched the Terran fleet with a mix of confusion and awe. Humanity had been considered a young, unpredictable species, one that acted too quickly and felt too strongly. But now those same traits made the galaxy uneasy. If humans were willing to risk so much for strangers, what else were they capable of? Some began to question if humanity was more dangerous or more noble than they had assumed. Either answer was unsettling. While the fleet raced onward, a sudden update flashed on the main screen. The unknown attackers had left behind energy trails, the same forbidden weapon patterns detected earlier. The science teams aboard the Terran ships studied the trails carefully. Bits of history whispered through their findings. Old stories, old threats. The kind that older civilizations had kept quiet because they didn't want younger species growing fearful. But humans had never inherited those fears. Everything they were discovering now felt like a challenge to overcome, not a curse to run from. By now, the Terran crews had finished preparing. Every pilot was locked in. Every medic was ready. Every soldier had tightened their gear. The noise in the hallways had died down. The soft hum of the engines filled the air like a heartbeat. The galaxy's older powers watched humanity's quiet preparation with mixed emotions. Some admired the courage. Some shook their heads at what they believed was foolishness. But one thing was becoming clear to everyone watching. When the distress call reached the humans, they did not hesitate. They did not hide. They did not remain silent. They moved. Inside the flagship, the last few minutes before arrival felt heavy. Crew members checked their screens with steady hands. The countdown to warp exit blinked on every display. Each second made their pulse sharper. People thought about the colony. They imagined the survivors hiding somewhere, waiting, hoping, clinging to life. They imagined them staring at dark skies, wondering if anyone had heard their desperate cry. In a way, humanity had taken that cry personally. Some crew members whispered small prayers. Others stared ahead with determination. Not one person regretted the decision to come. The unknown danger didn't scare them away. It pulled them in. The admiral finally stood from his seat as the countdown reached the final numbers. The lights dimmed. The engine hum deepened. A soft vibration moved through the metal floors. Everyone braced themselves. The moment stretched. Breath held. Eyes fixed forward. The warp corridor dissolved. Into swirling colors. The stars reshaped. Themselves and humanity arrived not as observers, as political players, but as protectors ready to stand between danger and the lives, waiting on a distant world, whatever waited for them now. They were prepared to face it, not because they were fearless, but because someone out there needed them. And that one truth drove every heartbeat on every Terran ship. They had made their choice the moment they heard the distress call. And now, the galaxy would see what it meant when humanity moved first. When the Terran fleet finally dropped out of warp, the stars settled into their normal shapes again, and everyone on board felt a shift inside them. The calm, blue glow of the warp tunnel faded, replaced by the cold, open space of the colony's region. They had imagined many things on the journey, but the sight that greeted them was worse than any picture their minds had created. Right away, the scanners picked up broken signals, faint life signs, strange heat patterns across the surface, and marks in the atmosphere where something massive had passed through. The colony below wasn't fully dark, but it flickered like a dying lamp. with power systems trying to restart and failing again. Even without stepping foot on the ground, the crew knew something terrible had happened here, in the command room. The mood changed from tense to deeply serious. The officers spoke quietly, reviewing the scanner readings. Some of the younger crew members swallowed hard when they saw the damage. Large craters dotted the ground, not from natural events, but from weapons. Not modern weapons either, but something older, rougher, more destructive in a very unnatural way. It was like someone had dug deep wounds into the land itself. The Terran ships adjusted their positions, forming a protective circle over the colony. Everyone expected an enemy fleet to appear at any moment, but the sky stayed too quiet. There was no ship waiting, no signs of attackers, no active battle. It was like the enemy had vanished into the void right after delivering their blow. The Admiral ordered drones to be launched toward the surface. The drones flew through the thin atmosphere, scanning as they went. What they captured on their cameras caused a heavy silence in the command room. Buildings were damaged, walkways collapsed, and fields that once grew crops were left in ruins. Smoke still rose in thin trails from several points across the colony. Whatever had attacked them hadn't just come to frighten them, it had come with purpose. But among all the destruction, there were signs of life. Weak life signs, but real. The medics immediately activated rescue protocols. The Terran landing teams prepared to descend, checking their gear and loading medical supplies. No one knew what condition the survivors were in, but they were determined to reach them quickly. Inside one of the dropships, the soldiers sat strapped in their seats. The engines hummed softly beneath them. Some of them stared out the small windows, watching the colony grow larger as the ship descended. Others closed their eyes, steadying their breathing. The distress signal they had heard back on Earth replayed in their minds. Now they were moments away from the people who had sent it. The dropship touched down near the main settlement. The dust settled around the landing gear, and the hatch opened with a hiss. The air was still warm from recent destruction, carrying a faint smell of burnt materials. The ground beneath their boots was uneven and cracked. The Terran team moved forward carefully. They weren't here to fight. They were here to save whoever was left out. As they approached the first structure, they heard faint movement inside. A rescue worker knocked on the metal door and called out, letting any survivors know who they were. Slowly, the door slid open. A small group of frightened colonists stepped out, blinking in the daylight. They looked exhausted, their clothes covered in dust, their faces pale. They had been hiding in sealed rooms, afraid to come out. When they saw the humans, many of them froze, unsure of what to expect. The Zithari species had heard about humans, but many had never seen one in person. One of the Terran medics lowered her gear and gently approached them, speaking softly. She assured them they were safe now. The colonists stared for a moment, then relief washed over their faces. Some stepped forward quickly, others slowly, but all of them let the medics guide them toward the landing area. As more teams spread out, they found more survivors in different shelters. Some were in underground storage rooms, others in damaged buildings reinforced with debris. Many were shaken, trembling from shock and exhaustion. The Terrans offered water, blankets, and calm voices. They didn't rush the survivors. They didn't interrogate them. Humans had learned long ago that the first thing people need after fear is kindness. Later, after some survivors regained enough strength to speak, one of them explained what had happened. The colony had been living peacefully. Then one night, alarms blared across the settlement. Something huge had entered their sky, something they couldn't identify. Before they even understood what was happening, bright flashes tore across their defenses. The colonists tried to activate their shields, but the attackers had used weapons that shut them down instantly. Old weapons. Illegal weapons. The kind that the galaxy had banned for ages. When the Terran soldiers heard this, They exchanged uneasy looks. The pattern matched the ancient energy trails they had detected earlier. Someone in the galaxy had not only broken old laws, they had used technology that should have been destroyed long ago. The survivors continued their story, speaking slowly between breaths. They said the attackers moved fast, struck hard, and then disappeared as quickly as they came. It was like they wanted destruction, not occupation. They didn't take anything. They didn't send messages. They didn't communicate. They left only fear. A young Zethari officer, barely older than a trainee, stepped forward and told the Terran team that she had been monitoring the colony's scanners during the attack. She had seen the weapon signatures herself, bright, pulsing waves that didn't match any modern armies. She remembered old stories she had learned in her academy training. Stories about raiders who once moved through unprotected systems thousands of years ago. Stories the older species claimed were gone forever, but she said the energy signatures were the same. The Terran crew listened in quiet shock. Old myths suddenly felt real. If these raiders had truly returned, the entire galaxy was in danger, not just this colony. But right now, the team focused on the survivors. Some were dehydrated. Some were injured from falling debris. Some were simply too terrified to speak. The Terran medics handled all of it with steady hands. They set up temporary shelters, created clean areas for treatment, and prepared to move the survivors to the waiting medical ships in orbit. Despite the destruction, the humans treated everyone with patience. Even the smallest injury received attention. Even the quietest cry was heard. Humanity had been called emotional by many species, but right now, that emotion was their strength. Their compassion made the survivors feel safe for the first time since the attack began. While rescue teams worked on the ground, Terran scouts moved across the outskirts of the colony. They followed the strange energy marks burned into the land. Some trails led to destroyed machinery. Other trails simply ended in empty fields, as if the attackers had vanished into thin air. The scouts sent their findings to the fleet above, where analysts attempted to piece together the pattern, but none of it made complete sense. The weapons were too old, the technology too ancient, the raiders too mysterious. And that mystery weighed heavily on everyone. On the ground, the Terran landing teams discovered something else: shattered pieces of unfamiliar metal. Small fragments, scorched and twisted. They collected samples and sent them to the science team. The scientists studied the fragments with handheld tools, frowning as strange signals came from the metal. It wasn't any known alloy. It wasn't modern. It shouldn't exist anymore. One scientist whispered that it was like touching history, dangerous history. By now, the sun over the colony had begun to set. Long shadows stretched across the damaged buildings. The Terran crew moved quickly to gather the last survivors before nightfall. The darkness made the atmosphere heavier, as if the colony itself remembered what had happened. The dropships lifted and carried the rescued colonists to the medical ship waiting in orbit. When the survivors stepped inside the bright, clean halls of the Terran vessel, many of them paused, overwhelmed by the sudden feeling of safety. Some sank to the floor for a moment, breathing in the warm air. Others stared at the humans with gratitude they couldn't yet express. But the Terrans didn't wait for thanks. They focused on treatment. They focused on comfort. They focused on giving the survivors the sense that their nightmare was over. Meanwhile, outside the medical ship's windows, the colony rotated slowly below a scarred world now under Terran protection. The Admiral looked out at the planet with a heavy expression. This wasn't just about one colony anymore. This was a warning, a message delivered in destruction. Whoever had attacked this place wasn't finished. And the Terran fleet knew that if the raiders returned, someone had to stand in their way. That someone for now was humanity. The survivors rested. The Terrans continued scanning. The galaxy remained silent, but deep inside every Terran on those ships, a single truth settled. They were no longer dealing with an ordinary enemy. They were facing something forgotten by time, and humanity had arrived, just in time to stop history from repeating itself. The Terran fleet stayed in orbit through the night, watching every signal, every movement, every tiny shift around the wounded colony below. Even though the scanners showed no active threat, the humans didn't relax. Something inside every crew member whispered that the attackers would return. It wasn't logic, it was instinct. The kind of instinct that comes when danger leaves too quickly, like a shadow hiding behind the next corner. On the medical ship, the rescued colonists slept in clean beds, far removed from the terrors they had faced. Terran medics moved quietly between the rooms, adjusting equipment, checking vitals, offering warm drinks to those who couldn't sleep. Some survivors kept waking up from bad dreams, expecting to hear explosions again. Each time, a human voice gently reassured them that they were safe now. Up on the flagship, however, the atmosphere was different. Calm on the surface, but tense underneath. The Admiral stood by the main window, watching the dark space outside. He wasn't looking for beauty. He was looking for movement, threats, anything unusual. And when the alert finally came, it wasn't a surprise. It was more like a confirmation of what he already felt in his bones. A loud beep broke the silence across the command room. The scanners lit up. Something had entered the edge of the system, fast and without identification. The energy signatures were familiar. Too familiar. The same forbidden weapons, the same ancient power, the same dangerous pattern burned into the land earlier. The raiders were coming back. Crew members straightened in their seats. Conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes shifted toward the incoming symbols on the holographic map. The enemy ships were small, but fast-moving like predators, gliding through the dark. They had no official markings, no lights, nothing that said they belonged to this age. The Admiral didn't hesitate. His voice was steady as he ordered the fleet to move into defensive formation. The Terran ships obeyed instantly, shifting in perfect coordination. It was smooth, clean, and practiced like a shield made of metal, and while down on the surface, the remaining rescue teams received the warning. They rushed toward their ships, gathering their equipment, lifting the last injured colonists onto stretchers. They moved quickly, but not without care. Even with danger approaching, the Terrans refused to abandon anyone. When the dropships blasted off from the colony, the crew inside could see faint flashes in the sky, light bending as the enemy ships drew closer. The fleet had positioned itself between the colony and the threat. Terran ships didn't retreat. They didn't hide behind the planet. They placed their metal bodies exactly where the enemy would strike first. Reports came in rapidly. The enemy formation was tightening. Their weapons were charging. Whatever these raiders wanted, they intended to finish it now. The Terran fighters launched first. Dozens of small, fast human ships shot forward, leaving white streaks behind them. Their engines roared through space, and although no one could hear the sound outside, every pilot could feel the vibration inside the cockpit. They felt alive, focused, ready. The raiders reacted immediately. They shifted into a curved formation and fired the first blasts. Bright beams of energy cut across space, glowing in strange colors. These weren't normal weapons. They shimmered and pulsed in uneven waves, like lightning wrapped in metal. Terran shields absorbed the first hits, but the impact shook the ships harder than expected. It reminded everyone that this was no ordinary enemy. The Admiral gave the order. The Terran fleet fired back. Human weapons weren't the strongest in the galaxy, but they were precise, sharp, reliable. The first volley struck the raider ships, forcing them to break formation. Terran fighters moved like arrows, dodging incoming fire, circling around the raiders, pushing them back. For the first time, the raiders hesitated. They had expected an easy return. A quick strike. A defenseless world. Not a human fleet waiting for them with shields raised and weapons locked on. The raiders' hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough. Terran pilots took advantage, cutting through their ranks. One raider ship exploded in a burst of brilliant light. Another spun out of control, crashing into its own formation. The humans kept pushing, refusing to give even a meter of space dot above them. The Terran cruisers unleashed wide-range weapon bursts designed not to destroy, but to trap. They blocked escape routes, cut off angles, forced the raiders into a shrinking area of space. Every time a raider ship tried to slip away, a Terran vessel was there to cut it off. The raiders had never faced a species that fought like this. Humans weren't the strongest. They didn't have ancient technology. They weren't trained in secret arts. They just refused to back down, and that refusal was stronger than any weapon. Back on the colony's surface, the locals watched the sky light up with streaks of fiery energy. To them, it felt like the heavens were battling. Every flash, every spark, was a reminder that someone was fighting for them. Not their own government, not a nearby empire, a species that owed them nothing, but still came. Inside the Terran flagship, the admiral monitored the battle with sharp eyes. The raiders were skilled, fast, and coordinated, but they weren't prepared for how aggressively humans defended others. The Terran fleet fought with unity, discipline, and something rarer emotion. A deep belief that no innocent life should be abandoned. As the battle intensified, the raiders tried one last desperate maneuver. They shifted toward the colony, aiming to bypass the Terrans entirely. Maybe they hoped the humans would retreat. Maybe they thought humans valued self-preservation more than strangers. But they were wrong. Terran ships immediately repositioned, forming an unbreakable wall. The raiders crashed into that wall like waves hitting cliffs. Their weapons hit the Terran shields again and again, but the humans held their ground. Terran fighters swooped in, picking the raiders off one by one. Their movements were sharp and controlled, but there was something else behind their actions. Anger. Not the wild kind, the protective kind. Anger born from seeing what had been done to the colony, from hearing the terrified distress call, from hearing the survivors describe the attack. The Terrans made sure the raiders felt that anger. Another raider ship exploded, scattering glowing fragments through space. Two more tried to flee, but were cut off by Terran cruisers. The humans targeted their engines, not the cores. They didn't want to cause unnecessary destruction. They wanted to force the raiders to face what they had done. The remaining raiders finally began retreating, slipping into dark space in uneven, panicked movements. Their perfect formation had collapsed. Their confidence had cracked, and their mission had failed completely. When the last raider signal disappeared from the scanner, the Terran fleet didn't cheer. They simply stayed where they were, forming a silent shield above the colony. The danger had passed, but the weight of what they had faced stayed heavy in their minds. Down on the planet, the survivors watched the sky slowly darken again. The bright flashes faded. The storm of battle calmed. And for the first time since the attack began, they felt a sense of peace. Some cried. Some simply stared in disbelief. A few whispered something they never expected to say. Humans saved us. Back on the flagship, the admiral took a deep breath. The battle wasn't just a victory, it was a message. A message to the raiders and to the galaxy. The Terran fleet had stood between danger and the helpless, and they had not moved aside. They had not hesitated. Humanity had confronted an ancient fear, an unknown enemy, and pushed it back, not because they were trying to prove something, not because they wanted power, but because someone needed help. And when humanity hears a call like that, they answer. They always answer. The moment the giant alien vessel began to stabilize, a deep silence fell across every deck of the human rescue ship. It was the kind of silence that came after a long storm, when everyone finally had a second to breathe and feel the weight of what they had just survived. People stood near consoles with tired eyes, some still shaking from the tension, some leaning against walls as if their legs couldn't carry them anymore. Even the lights seemed softer, as though the ship itself understood that the crew needed a moment of calm. But no one forgot why they had come. They had answered a distress call that had made entire star systems tremble. They had come because someone far from home had cried for help, and humans simply could not ignore that kind of cry. That was the simple truth behind everything. The alien leader, who had spent the last hours fighting for the survival of their species, sent a message requesting to speak directly with the human captain and her team. The message came through gently, almost cautiously, as if the leader still couldn't believe the humans were real. After all, moments earlier their ship had been spinning helplessly, its power fading, its people terrified. And now they were safe, because of humans, creatures they had never met, never seen, and only heard rumors about. The captain agreed immediately. She walked toward the communication chamber with slow steps, not because she was tired, although she was, but because she understood the weight of this moment. Every choice she made today could shape trust between two civilizations that had never crossed paths before. Her crew followed behind her, each one still in their suits, patches of dust and scorch marks showing the chaos they had worked through. When the call opened, the giant screen filled with the face of the alien leader. Their features were different from humans, but their expression one of exhaustion, relief, and disbelief felt painfully familiar. For a long moment, the leader didn't speak. They simply stared at the humans as if trying to memorize them, to convince themselves this wasn't a dream. Then the leader's voice came, soft but steady. They didn't start with a greeting. They didn't start with a speech. Instead, they said something simple. You came. That was all. 2 words. But the way they said them made something tighten in every human chest. Because those 2 words carried fear, hope, and the kind of gratitude that came only from someone who had truly believed they were going to die. The captain nodded slowly. Of course we came. You called for help. The alien leader lowered their head, overwhelmed. We believed. No one could reach us. Not in time. Their voice trembled slightly before they added, We believed we would be forgotten. You weren't, the captain said, her voice gentle but firm. Not by us. Not ever. Those words changed something in the air, like a warm wind after a long, cold night. The alien leader straightened, their expression growing more focused, as they explained the deeper truth behind the distress call. Their ship had not simply malfunctioned. It had been attacked after an encounter with a hostile force at the edge of their territory. They had fled blindly into uncharted space, hoping anyone would hear their signal before their engines died completely. The humans listened carefully. None of them interrupted. None judged. They simply listened, because that was the first step toward trust. When the alien leader finished, it was clear they still feared how the humans would react. They expected blame. They expected coldness. They expected a reminder that they were strangers. Instead, the captain simply said, You're safe now. And as long as we're here, no one will harm you. A quiet gasp came from the alien side of the call. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was small, fragile, almost childlike. But it held everything: the fear of the past hours, the relief of being saved, and the shock that an unknown species would offer protection without asking anything in return. After the call ended, the humans prepared to board the alien ship and help with repairs. They didn't move with fear or hesitation. They moved with the steady calm of people who understood that helping others was simply what life demanded. They traveled through tunnels of dim blue lights, through rooms that felt strange and unfamiliar, And yet, they walked with a sense of purpose. The aliens watched them carefully. Some were confused. Some were hopeful. Some were clearly scared, not because of who the humans were, but because they had never seen another species act this confidently and kindly at the same time. The humans didn't rush. They didn't act superior. They greeted everyone they passed, offering quiet reassurances in simple words. One young alien, no taller than the human engineers' waists, stared at them with wide eyes. When one of the human crew members carefully knelt and offered a small smile, the young alien stepped forward and touched the human's gloved hand. The moment was small and gentle, but everyone who saw it felt something warm inside. Trust was forming, not with speeches, but with small, honest moments like this. As repairs continued, the alien leader joined the humans on one of the upper decks. The damage to the ship was worse than the humans had expected. Whole sections had overheated, and some systems were close to collapse. But humans didn't panic. They simply worked faster. They shared tools, ideas, and methods with the aliens as if they had known them for years. The leader watched all this silently before turning to the captain. "Your people? They act like they have known us forever," the leader said, their voice low. "That's because you're in trouble," the captain replied. "And when someone is in trouble, we don't stand aside." The leader seemed unsure how to respond. Finally, their voice cracked slightly as they said, "In our history, no other species has ever answered a call like this. Many hear distress signals. Few care." The captain looked at the leader with calm eyes. "Well," she said softly, "humans care. Maybe too much sometimes. But that's who we are." The leader almost laughed, the sound small but real. They glanced at their damaged ship, then at the humans rushing around to help. "Our people will never forget this," they whispered. "They will speak about your species for generations." Night, or what passed for night, on a ship deep in space, finally came. The humans invited some of the alien crew into their vessel so they could rest, eat, and recover. At first, the aliens hesitated, unsure if they were welcome. But when the humans stepped aside and opened the doors wide, smiling in a warm and natural way, the aliens slowly walked in. And the moment they did, something beautiful happened. Both sides relaxed. Both sides realized they didn't need to fear each other. The room filled with quiet conversations, curious glances, and cautious smiles. Humans offered food, explaining each item slowly, so the aliens understood what was safe for them. In return, the aliens shared stories from their own world, simple, harmless stories about their festivals, their oceans, their skies. It was not a political agreement. It was not a formal alliance. It was something far more meaningful. It was the beginning of understanding. Hours later, the alarm chimed softly, signaling that the alien ship was fully repaired. The humans and aliens stood side by side as the main engines powered up, glowing bright and steady. A cheer rose from both crews, not loud, not wild, but full of relief and pride. The alien leader stepped forward and bowed deeply toward the humans, not as a gesture of submission, but as a gesture of deep, sincere respect. "You saved us," they said, "not because we are allies, not because we belong to your world, but because we asked for help. That is a kind of courage and kindness we thought only existed in stories." The captain shook her head gently. "Stories begin somewhere," she said. "Maybe this is where yours begins." The aliens smiled in a way that almost made their eyes shine. They stepped back onto their own ship, their people following behind them with new hope in their steps. As the alien vessel rose, its engines humming with renewed strength. Every human on the rescue ship stood watching. They didn't wave. They didn't salute. They simply stood quietly, knowing they had done something that would echo across the stars. The alien ship sent one final message. before jumping into deep space. Only one line. When the stars trembled, humanity arrived, and everything changed. The message ended. Silence returned. But this time, it felt peaceful. The humans slowly walked back to their posts. They felt tired, yes, but also proud. They had answered a call that others ignored. They had stepped into unknown space and chose compassion over fear. And now, somewhere out there, a whole species spoke their name with gratitude. No medals would be given. No grand speeches would be made. But every person aboard that human ship knew the truth. They had changed. A story that had once been written in fear, and they had rewritten it with hope. The stars had trembled, and humanity had answered.